There was nothing special about that Tuesday. No holiday, no storm. Just the kind of mild, sun-warmed afternoon that felt like it might drift quietly into memory without ever being remembered. And for Harold Dean, that was more than enough. At 72, Harold didn't ask much from the world anymore. He had his small apartment, his VA pension, and his routines, sacred in their simplicity. 3 days a week, he made the trip down to Wilson's grocery on his old Schwinn cruiser. The tires more patchwork than rubber by now, but the ride still smooth enough if he stayed out of traffic. He rose early, the way he had since 1968, and moved through the morning like muscle memory. Shave, black coffee, light breakfast, then gear up. He wore the same thing most days: faded jeans, a clean flannel shirt, and a weather cap embroidered with USMC Vietnam. That cap never changed, no matter the season. That Tuesday, he pedaled south along Main Street. The wind pressed gently against his chest, and for once his knees didn't ache. A good day by his standards. He made the trip without pause, filled the bike's twin panniers with groceries, careful to balance the weight like a field pack. Cans on one side, eggs and bread on the other. Milk up front. He was halfway home, rolling past Merritt Avenue, when he heard the snap. A sharp, metallic ping followed by the feeling that something vital had let go beneath him. He knew that sound, knew it the way a soldier knows the clack of a misfire. The chain had given out. Harold steered toward the shoulder, feathering the brakes. The Schwinn jerked once, then rolled to a graceless stop. When he looked up, his heart sank, not because of the mechanical failure, but because of where he was. The Iron Horse Tavern. It sat like a concrete bunker at the edge of town, a repurposed warehouse with steel beam bones and a gravel parking lot crowded with rumbling bikes. Harleys, mostly. The kind with custom chrome and skull-adorned handlebars. The kind that didn't like being stared at or disturbed. Harold had heard the stories. Everyone in Madison County had. Brawls. Tattoos earned, not inked. Men who lived loud and fast and didn't take kindly to interruptions. And now, here he was, a bent old man with a broken bike, a dozen eggs, and a chain dangling like a snapped tendon. The front patio of the bar was full. Tables of bikers drinking in the afternoon sun, their laughter carrying through the heat. Leather vests, beer bottles, heavy boots, the kind of scene Harold would have walked around 10 blocks out of the way if he could. But the chain had chosen this moment. And Harold, as he had in so many worse places, squared his jaw and stepped forward. He laid the Schwinn gently on its side, knelt beside it, and pulled a small multi-tool from the breast pocket of his shirt. His fingers trembled slightly, the lingering tremors that had followed him since his third stroke. Not enough to stop him, just enough to humble him. As he began inspecting the damage, the laughter from the patio shifted. Focused. Sharpened. "Looks like Grandpa took a wrong turn from the nursing home," someone called. A ripple of laughter followed. Harold didn't look up. He didn't respond. He just kept working, fingers fumbling with the chain, eyes low, expression fixed. "Bet that bike saw more battles than he did," another voice sneered. Another wave of laughter, louder this time. A beer bottle clinked against concrete. Someone whistled mockingly. Harold tried to steady the chain, but his hands betrayed him. The tool slipped. A clatter on pavement. The front basket tipped. Clang. Cans rolled. One bounced off his foot. A Granny Smith apple escaped, rolling in a lazy arc before coming to rest against the combat boot of a man twice Harold's size. And still, no one moved to help. Phones appeared. One biker crouched, camera aimed like a weapon. Live from the battlefield, he chuckled. Old man versus gravity. The laughter came again, thicker now, crueler, like a high school cafeteria in grown-up disguise. Harold exhaled through his nose. His knees ached, his pride more so, but he moved slowly, deliberately, gathering each fallen item without flinching. He touched the edge of his cap, a calming gesture, and in that quiet moment his mind went elsewhere. A jungle, the buzz of insects, the scream of artillery far off. He remembered carrying Private Wilkins through ankle-deep mud, 2 clicks west of Keysand. The boy's legs were mangled, soaked in blood and panic. Harold had hoisted him up, fireman style, and trudged half a mile while bullets cracked branches overhead. Wilkins didn't make a sound. Neither did Harold. He hadn't cried then. He wouldn't cry now, but that didn't mean the shame didn't sting. Back in the present, the laskin was retrieved. He placed it gently in the pannier, then adjusted the bag like a drill sergeant checking a field kit. The laughter had slowed. A few bikers had turned their phones away. One leaned back, eyes narrowed, unsure now what he was witnessing. Harold stood, straight as his spine would allow. The sun hit his face. His cap cast a shadow across his lined features. Beneath his shirt, the chain of his dog tags pressed cold against his chest. "Let him be," a woman's voice muttered. Soft, uneasy. No one responded. But something was shifting. The air had changed. Harold bent again, this time to retrieve his chain tool. His hand brushed gravel. The metal was warm from the sun, rough with rust, but still capable. Just like him. And just as he straightened, a new sound broke through the quiet. The heavy thud of boots on gravel. Slow, measured, commanding. Heads turned. From the dark interior of the bar emerged a giant of a man, 6'4", wide as a truck frame. A leather vest stretched over his bulk. Arms inked from shoulder to wrist. Beard streaked with gray. His name was Logan Grizz McCall, and everyone at the Iron Horse knew it. He paused at the patio's edge, surveyed the scene. The broken bike, the groceries, the old Marine standing like a battered flagpole, and said nothing. Then he stepped forward. Boot. Crunch. Boot. Crunch. The laughter vanished. Grizz's eyes moved across the crowd. One biker lowered his phone. Another shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He stopped in front of Harold. Looked down. Looked up. Then, in a move no one expected, he bent, lifted the Schwinn like it weighed nothing, turned toward the bar, and said over his shoulder, "You coming?" Harold blinked. He wasn't sure what he saw in the man's eyes. Pity? No. It was something harder. Older. Recognition. He gathered his groceries and followed. Behind him, the patio was silent. But inside, something had just begun. The moment Harold Dean stepped across the threshold of the Iron Horse Tavern, the air changed. The music from the old jukebox, a crackling rock ballad from decades past, seemed to fade as if the speakers themselves sensed a shift. Eyes turned, heads lifted from pints and ashtrays. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Behind Harold, Grizz McCall wheeled the battered Schwinn through the bar, his boots thudding against the wood floor like a war drum. The bike's chain still dangled uselessly, brushing the ground with a soft metallic tick. Tick, tick. No one said a word. Harold took it all in. The grimy pool tables, the patches stitched on leather cuts, the scent of stale beer and gasoline. He hadn't been in a bar like this since Saigon. Back then, it had been sandbags and mosquito nets. This was louder, but just as tense. Grizz marched straight to the nearest pool table, swept a full rack of balls into the pockets with one arm, and laid the Schwinn gently on the green felt like a relic on an altar. Then he turned. "All right," he said, voice low but full of gravel. "Let's fix this right." It wasn't a request. A long moment passed. No one moved. Then a sound, soft at first, the squeak of a stool being pushed back. A biker in a sleeveless denim vest rose, walked to a saddlebag by the door, and pulled out a small toolkit. Another followed, then a third. One of the younger guys brought over a flashlight, its beam flickering like a handheld spotlight over Harold's bent frame. Grizz said nothing more. He just stood back, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. Harold set his grocery bags down on a chair. A man came up and offered to refill the coffee in Harold's thermos. A simple gesture that said more than any apology. The bikers gathered. One inspected the snap chain. Another adjusted the warped front wheel. "Brake cables are toast," someone said. "I've got spares. I've got cleaning solution," added a woman in braided pigtails and mirror glasses. She stepped out into the parking lot and returned 10 minutes later with 2 brand-new tires, still smelling of rubber and promise. She placed them carefully beside the table. Still, Harold said nothing. He stood by the jukebox, watching quietly as the men and women who had laughed at him an hour earlier now bent over his bicycle with the precision of combat medics. Hands wiped with oil-streaked rags. Tools passed silently from one to another. The sound of ratchets and chain links filled the space. Harold rested a hand on the back of a bar stool. His fingers curled slightly, knuckles white. Not from pain, from the weight of it all. He hadn't been seen like this in years. Not really seen. For a moment, time slipped. His eyes drifted, and suddenly he was 23 again, deep in Inhoa Basin, the air thick with rain and gunpowder. Move! Move! His voice echoed in memory. He was carrying Private Tim Reynolds, blood soaking through the man's fatigues, his leg shredded from shrapnel. Harold's back burned. His boots slipped in the red mud. But he kept going. They had made it. Both of them. Tim had lived. A voice cut through the memory. Carver! Harold blinked. A younger biker, early 30s, approached slowly, nervous energy in his step. Carver. Dean? He asked, holding something in his hand. A photograph. Old and creased. Harold turned. Harold, he said. The man swallowed. My dad was Tim Reynolds. He used to talk about you. Said you saved his life. Said a Marine carried him on his back through the jungle after the ambush at Key San. Harold's breath hitched. His eyes narrowed, searching the younger man's face. You his boy? Yes, sir. There was a pause. Then Harold nodded once. He made it home. That's what mattered. The biker's voice caught. He always said, you were the reason. A silence rippled outward like a dropped stone. Around them, hands stilled. The sound of tools faded. Someone turned off the jukebox entirely. The bar was hushed. Then Grizz stepped forward. He didn't say anything at first. He reached slowly toward Harold's chest. Harold flinched, an old reflex, but then relaxed as Grizz gently lifted the dog tags from beneath his shirt. The metal clinked softly. Grizz turned them over in his calloused hand, reading aloud. Harold Dean, Serialno, 24198-315. Blood type O. Religion, none. USMC, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Vietnam, 68-70. He looked up. You were a Marine. Harold nodded. Still am. And then something happened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. Bikers, one by one, began standing straighter. Some lowered their eyes. Others simply stood still, hands folded in front of them. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Something that didn't need to be spoken. Reverence. Harold's bicycle wasn't a machine anymore. It was a symbol. And the man who'd pushed it, bent over it, picked up its spilled contents while being mocked. He wasn't a stranger anymore. He was one of them. No, more than that. He was someone they had forgotten to remember. Grizz placed the tags back gently. Thank you for your service, Marine, he said, voice steady. Harold didn't speak. He just gave a slow, silent nod. A woman nearby, the same who had fetched the tires, touched Harold's shoulder briefly. We didn't know, she said. But we do now. Then the transformation began in earnest. They didn't just fix the bike, they overhauled it. The rusted bolts were replaced. Wool bearings repacked with fresh grease. The chain swapped for a top-grade link chain. Someone even brought out a pressure washer from the back and sprayed down the frame until it gleamed like wet chrome. Grizz barked orders like a foreman on a mission. He wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. There was too much honor in the room for anyone to joke. Harold sat quietly, watching his bike, his independence, being resurrected by strangers who now acted like kin. And though he didn't say much, something in his posture shifted. Not pride, not arrogance, just peace. That rare kind of peace that comes when you realize you're not forgotten. Not today, not here, and certainly not now. The final click of the chain link echoed softly against the wooden walls of the Iron Horse Tavern, but no one spoke. The work was done. The bicycle stood upright on the cleared pool table like something resurrected. No longer a rusting relic, but a machine reborn. Its frame gleamed from the fresh polish, now free of grime and rust. The worn rubber had been replaced with 2 brand-new puncture-resistant tires, and the hand grips, once cracked and flaking, were wrapped tight with black leather tape. And on the front fender, just below the handlebar stem, someone had affixed a small Marine Corps emblem. A silent marker. A reminder. Harold stood off to the side, watching. There were no cheers. No pats on the back. No vadines. Just a stillness. The kind that only comes after something sacred is finished. One biker stepped away first, then another. Some left the room entirely. Not to retreat, but to give space. Space for what they couldn't explain, but all felt. Harold walked slowly to the table, ran his fingertips across the polished seat, then down the tube where the fresh paint covered old dings. He paused at the emblem. His hand lingered there. It was a bicycle, and it was more than that. It was a declaration that he mattered, that he had not disappeared into the backdrop of a fast-moving world. And then Grizz returned. From the back room, he emerged holding something folded carefully in both hands. His boots didn't stomp now. They moved with a different rhythm, like someone approaching a gravesite or a flag at half-mast. He stopped in front of Harold and offered the bundle without words. Harold took it and slowly unfolded the leather. It was a vest, not club colors, not the branded patches or the flames or skulls the others wore. This was plain, black, and worn in at the seams, except for one word, embroidered across the back, just above where the shoulders met. Respect. Nothing more. Harold looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment, nothing else in the room existed. Grizz didn't say a speech, didn't make an announcement. He simply placed the vest over Harold's shoulders and stepped back. Harold's hands trembled slightly as they touched the leather, not from age, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming simplicity of all, from a lifetime of being unspoken for, and now, silently, finally acknowledged. A breath escaped him, not a sigh, not a sob, but something deeper, something released after decades of carrying too much for too long. A single tear traced a line down his cheek, but no one mentioned it. No one needed to. A man like Harold Dean didn't cry often, but when he did, the world understood to stay silent. It was Grizz who finally broke the silence. He turned toward the crowd. Not just bikers anymore, but brothers. "All right," he said, voice steady. "Who's riding with the sergeant?" Nearly every hand went up. No hesitation. Outside, the bikes fired up one by one, engines rumbling like a distant storm forming. Harold mounted his bike slowly. It felt different now, sturdier, lighter. Or maybe it was just his heart that felt lighter. The vest warmed his back. The Marine emblem shone in the last rays of the afternoon. Grizz led the way. 24 motorcycles idled behind Harold, waiting, and then they moved. Out of the bar lot, down Main Street, into the heart of town. There were no sirens, no parade banners, no flags, but it was a procession all the same. People stopped in their tracks. Storefronts emptied. Children pointed. Elders removed their hats. A few saluted quietly from the curb. Harold didn't wave. He didn't need to. He just rode, upright, steady, flanked by thunder and steel. A man not seeking attention, but finally surrounded by its rightful form. By the time they reached his apartment complex, the sun had slipped low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The motorcycles fanned out in a V formation, lining both sides of the path like an honor guard. Harold dismounted. He walked the bicycle slowly between them. Every rider, from a newest prospect to the old-timers in denim, stood at attention. No words, just nods, chin lifts, the small, respectful gestures that spoke more loudly than applause ever could. At the end of the line, Grizz waited. As Harold stepped past him, Grizz leaned in and said low, "You ever need anything, anything at all, you come to us." Harold nodded once. "I will." They clasped hands. No deep contest. No macho display. Just shared strength. Grizz released him, then turned to the others. "All right," he said. "Let's move out." Engines roared back to life. One by one, the bikes peeled off into the darkening street. But not quickly, not recklessly, like soldiers departing a ceremony. Harold stood at the gate to his complex, the leather vest still on his back. He watched them go until the last taillight vanished. He turned to wheel his bike inside. Before he reached his door, he paused, looked down at the emblem, then whispered two words only he could hear. "I remember." And in that moment, the man the world had almost overlooked became impossible to forget. The sun hadn't yet broken over Madison County when the work began. A pair of men, one younger, one old enough to limp slightly, bolted a brass plaque into the brick wall just left of the front entrance of the Iron Horse Tavern. No ceremony, no press, just the hiss of a power drill, the soft thud of a hand testing for level. By the time the first motorcycles rolled into the lot that morning, the plaque was shining beneath the porch light. It read, "Here, respect is earned and remembered." No one asked who put it there. They didn't need to. That morning, Harold Dean pedaled by just after 7:30. He always did on Thursdays. Groceries were light that day, just coffee, eggs, and a small bag of oats. But the basket on the front of the Schwinn was perfectly balanced. As he passed the tavern, the few bikers on the patio stood. Not rushed, not exaggerated. They simply stood. One took off his helmet. Another lowered his cigarette. A third raised his coffee mug like a toast, then brought it down without drinking. Harold didn't stop, but he nodded once, slow and steady. A silent salute, returned in kind. It became a ritual. Every time Harold passed the bar, whether it was morning or dusk, the same thing happened. Conversations paused. Helmets came off. Some bikers stood. Others simply placed a hand over their heart. A few saluted. It wasn't planned. It just was. And the town noticed. At first, it was whispers. "That's him." People would murmur at the gas station, at the bank, at the diner. "That's the Marine." Children waved from school buses. A few joggers changed their running routes to pass the Iron Horse around 7:30. Then came the invitations. One crisp November morning, a letter arrived from the principal of Madison Elementary. They were holding a Veterans Day assembly. Would Mr. Harold Dean be willing to speak? Harold hadn't stepped onto a stage since 1972. He almost said no, but something in the letter, the way it was handwritten, signed in blue ink, made him pause. So he said yes. They gave him 5 minutes. He spoke for 3. No microphone. No slideshow. Just a man in a flannel shirt and Marine Corps cap, standing in a gymnasium full of squirming 4th and 5th graders. "I don't remember every name," he told them, "but I remember the weight of carrying someone, of making a home when others didn't." He paused. One hand rested lightly on the dog tags around his neck, and I remember how long it took to feel seen again. That was all. There was a long silence. Then, unexpectedly, a boy from the back raised his hand. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Does it hurt to be forgotten?" Harold didn't blink. "Yes," he said, "but it heals. If someone remembers you again." The teacher wiped a tear from her cheek. A few students clapped softly. Most just sat still, unsure what they were feeling, but knowing it was important. That weekend, a father and son were seen repainting the old war memorial at the edge of town, the one no one had touched in years. No one asked them to. They just did it. One rainy Thursday evening, a knock came at Harold's door. He lived in a modest one-bedroom unit on the east side, tidy, quiet, the kind of place that held memories instead of clutter. When he opened the door, a young man stood on the steps. Leather jacket, ball cap in hand, shoulders slumped. I'm Cody," he said, from a bar. From that day, Harold studied his face. Recognition flickered. "You were filming?" he said. The young man winced. "Yeah." He held out a small USB stick. "I deleted it. From everywhere. This is the only copy. I thought maybe if you wanted it." Harold didn't take it. Not right away. Cody lowered his hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "Back then, I didn't know what I was seeing." Harold looked at him, then at the rain, then back again. "You know now." The young man nodded. "Yes, sir." Harold reached out and took the drive. "Then we're square." Cody turned to leave. "Cody," Harold said. The young man looked back. "Thanks for standing last week." Cody's eyes lit. He nodded, almost shy, and disappeared into the rain. The following month brought something Harold never saw coming. His birthday. He didn't mark it on calendars. Never made a fuss. But somehow, someone at the tavern had found out. And they organized something that wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, but would be remembered for years to come. It started just after 9 a.m. Harold mounted his bicycle, groceries loaded as usual, and turned onto Main Street. That's when he heard it, a low rumble behind him. He glanced back. 2 motorcycles, then 4, then 10. By the time he reached the second intersection, 30 bikes rode behind him in formation. Slow, measured, protective. Not a sound except the steady hum of engines and the soft creak of Harold's bike pedals. Main Street came alive. Shops paused business. Customers stepped out. Elderly men removed their hats. Mothers placed hands on their children's shoulders and whispered, "Watch." People didn't cheer. They stood, still, reverent, like they were watching the passing of sacred flame. At the final stoplight, Grizz pulled alongside Harold and said nothing. He simply pointed ahead and revved his engine once. The procession continued all the way to the War Memorial, newly cleaned and flanked by small American flags. There, the bikes peeled off, forming a wide circle. Harold rode to the center and stopped. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He just sat there for a moment, eyes scanning the crowd, the flags, the faces. Then he dismounted, removed his cap, and stood silently in front of the stone. The townspeople followed suit. It lasted no more than 2 minutes. But for many who were there, it became the kind of memory that years later they'd describe with phrases like, "I was there," and "you could feel it." Later that evening, Harold sat on his porch. He watched the sun go down behind the sycamores. The vest still rested on the chair beside him, the one with respect stitched across the back. He touched it, almost absent-mindedly, not to admire it, but to remind himself it was real. He closed his eyes, and in that silence, for the first time in decades, he didn't feel alone. In a world moving faster by the minute, where headlines shout, opinions clash, and algorithms decide who gets seen, it's easy to overlook the ones who carry their burdens in silence. That's why the story of Harold Dean resonates so deeply. Because behind the polished uniforms and parades of memory, there are veterans like him, men and women who return from war not to applause, but to obscurity. They don't ask to be celebrated. They ask to be seen. What happened in Fairview, the fictional town in Harold's story, reflects a truth every community in America can relate to. Respect doesn't require a stage. It doesn't wait for Veterans Day. It begins on ordinary sidewalks, with small gestures, a nod at a bus stop, someone pausing to listen, a teenager removing their cap without needing to be told why. In Harold's town, what began as a cruel moment of mockery outside a bar became the spark for something greater. A ripple of recognition that spread from one patched leather vest to a whole town's conscience. The lesson is simple but urgent. We must look again. Look twice at the man slowly loading groceries into a rusted car. At the woman in the checkout line, counting change with trembling hands. At the neighbor who never complains, but whose eyes tell stories you haven't yet earned the right to hear. Chances are they've lived more than most of us will. And like Harold, they're still showing up, still moving forward, even when the chain slips and the world doesn't notice. Our culture often equates worth with noise, followers, headlines, influence. But stories like Harold's remind us, real honor is quieter. It kneels to fix a bike. It shows up at a high school to speak hard truths. It stands beside a friend without asking for answers. And when communities take time to listen to that kind of dignity, healing happens. Not in big declarations, but in bike racks, classroom silence, and standing salutes. We need more Harolds. But more importantly, we need more people willing to notice them before their story becomes a eulogy. Maybe the next time you see someone moving a little slower, holding themselves a little prouder, wearing a cap with a faded insignia, you'll pause. Not out of guilt, but out of understanding. Because like the plaque outside the Iron Horse said, here, respect is earned and remembered. It's up to us to make sure that memory stays alive.